Greetings, my name is Anastasia Dumitrovska, and next we're talking about another brilliant special operation. Ukraine destroyed an Iskander launcher right at the moment when a ballistic missile strike on Kyiv was being prepared. Sensational insider information. Ukraine will restore its nuclear potential. Russia is preparing a special operation against Moldova and is transferring a 10,000-strong army from Transnistria. Putin has decided on his retaliation for the destruction of strategic aviation and has issued a warning to Trump. Subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today, like this video so that as many people as possible can see it, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next episodes. Russia continues to terrorize Ukraine, and Putin's goal is the destruction of civilians. Last night, Ukrainians once again couldn't sleep, and some will never wake up again. Drones struck Bryansk in the Chernihiv region during the night. It is known that 5 people have died, including a 1-year-old baby. Just imagine, a rescuer arrived to deal with the aftermath of the attack, only to find out that the strike had hit his own home, where his wife, daughter, and 1-year-old grandson were. A neighbor witnessed everything that happened.
The first one flew by, a Shahed. Then the second or third hit the neighboring house. Well, I recognize it by the sound. Everything just started collapsing for me, even from the first one, and with the second, the roof began to cave in. That's it. I just woke up my mom, called for my mom. We ran. We thought that was it. Well, that it wasn't on such a large scale. And we ran to shut off the gas, so that nothing would explode just in case. But when I turned around, the house was just on fire. And, the doors were completely blocked because everything had burned.
A Russian drone also struck the Kherson Regional Military Administration. The video of the strike was published by the Russian military themselves. In Slovyansk, Donetsk region, it was also louder. Rescuer was wounded. People in Kharkiv couldn't sleep either because of drone attacks. In the city, 7 apartment buildings were damaged, 4 cars in the courtyards were completely burned, and the number of injured exceeds 13 people, including 2 children. And none of this is a strike on military targets. This is deliberate nighttime terror against ordinary people. Our condolences to the families of the dead and injured. Russia is a terrorist state. The defense forces continue to bring good news to Ukrainians, and the armed forces of Ukraine, together with the security service of Ukraine, struck an enemy Iskander launcher from which the occupiers were attempting to launch a missile strike on Kyiv. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Of the military, it concerns a unit of the 26th Missile Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces, which is stationed near the city of Kyiv in the Bryansk region. It was from there that the enemy attempted to launch a strike on one of the Ukrainian settlements and likely on Kyiv. According to preliminary information, 1 Iskander launcher was destroyed as a result of the detonation. 2 more were likely seriously damaged. Well, you understand that this is serious weaponry, worth millions of dollars. Respect to the Ukrainian defenders for their accuracy. Meanwhile, Ukrainian defense forces continue to boast about their achievements, and I am endlessly glad about that. As the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, wrote, the defense forces destroyed nearly 90,000 enemy targets in May alone using drones.
We are increasing the number of strikes against the occupiers with the help of drones and working on improving the effectiveness of their use.
At the same time, I would like to thank our defenders for their lightning-fast work. I also urge you to write a few words of support for our defenders in the comments. The Russians continue to actively advance in the Sumy region. This is reported by deep state analysts.
The enemy managed to capture Andriivka and Vodolagi and has entrenched themselves in these villages. The enemy's success is still accompanied by a large number of infantry, which is overwhelming, and they keep coming like cockroaches.
In Kindrativka, the armed forces of Ukraine are repelling enemy attacks and not allowing the Russians to gain a foothold, while in Oleksivka, analysts write, the situation is much more difficult.
Preliminarily, they have taken control of the northern part of the village and are trying to occupy the entire settlement. With a high probability, it will soon also move into the red zone.
The Russians are also putting pressure on the Yablunivka-Yunakivka sector. However, they are unable to gain a foothold there.
The situation remains critical due to the rapid advance of the enemy to a distance of 20 to 25 kilometers, from which they will be able to target Sumy with fiber optic drones, and they have already made similar attempts.
Meanwhile, NATO intelligence does not see any signs of Russia preparing a serious offensive against Sumy or the Dnipropetrovsk region. A high-ranking NATO official explained that the alliance observes an increase in intensity, but does not see any indications that the Russians are preparing major offensive operations against large cities in these regions.
We are seeing the front line expanding to the north and northeast of Sumy, but there's no evidence that Russia is currently preparing a serious offensive in the Sumy direction. This could potentially be preparation for an attack on the city of Sumy itself, but we do not see any evidence of that. Right now, it's about creating a buffer zone, and as far as I know, Russia has been planning to do this for a long time. Moreover, the recent destruction of bridges on Russian territory complicates logistics for the Russians in the Sumy direction.
And yes, it must be acknowledged that Russia currently does not have the resources to advance decisively and actively. However, Russia is still putting pressure and advancing, and honestly, the fact that it's happening slowly doesn't make it any easier. It's not any easier, especially for our defenders, and despite the enemy's significant numerical advantage, they are heroically holding the front. In response to Russia's demand that Ukraine not possess nuclear weapons, Ukraine will develop nuclear weapons, and our partners are already offering this to us. This was stated by the well-known Ukrainian political analyst Mykola Davyduk, citing his sources in government offices.
Ukraine must not have nukes. Great. Are you afraid that we might have nukes? We will have them. I even know the political formula for how to do it. I know, not publicly, but some of our partners are suggesting take up and consider the issue of violating the Budapest Memorandum, and we'll back you up and say, yes, we were the first to violate it, and we're ready to help you. There was a security forum in Lexi recently, so those conversations were happening there as well. And one of the British military officials said, we'll help you build a nuke ourselves. That's it. That's the answer.
In the case of Russia's demand that Ukraine not join NATO, a similar mechanism is at work.
Under no circumstances should Ukraine be allowed into NATO. Okay, we hear you, but we'll do it just to spite you, so you know that we're in NATO. The president was right today when he said that you attacked in 2014 without even asking whether we were in NATO or not. We weren't in NATO, and you attacked. So that's it, basically.
And what do you think of this approach to interacting with Russia? At the same time, the legendary commander of the 3rd Army Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Andriy Beletsky, also says that what can guarantee Ukraine's security is a modern and well-equipped army, as well as the possession of nuclear weapons.
Obviously, the only safeguard for peace, security, and all those wonderful words is the army. The Ukrainian army, not the British, not the French army, exclusively the Ukrainian army. It's a matter of ballistics. It's sooner or later, no matter what you do, and this is a question of nuclear weapons, and it's essential for our country. We have every right to eat legal, practical, physical, and moral.
Among Ukrainians, the mood is similar. The majority support the return of nuclear status to Ukraine, as this would radically change the rules of the game. I'd like to ask your opinion. How do you feel about Ukraine regaining nuclear weapons? Write your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, it seems Putin has come up with a new attack plan. According to journalists from the Financial Times, Russia plans to deploy 10,000 of its troops in Transnistria on the border with the Odesa region. And all this is in order to establish a pro-Kremlin government in Moldova. This was stated by Moldovan Prime Minister Dorin Rishin.
These are massive efforts aimed at undermining Moldovan democracy. They want to strengthen their military presence in the Transnistrian region.
According to estimates, there are currently about 1,500 servicemen under the Russian flag in Transnistria, but most of them are local residents. Moldova consistently emphasizes that the presence of Russian troops in the temporarily occupied Transnistria is illegal, and Chisinau expects the unconditional withdrawal of this contingent.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The United States has redirected to the Middle East some of the missiles that were supposed to be delivered to Ukraine. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal.
The United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth ordered that missile fuses, which Ukraine was supposed to receive to combat Russian drones, be redirected to American forces in the Middle East.
Meanwhile, the decision to send this aid to Ukraine was made back during the administration of former U.S. President Biden. Currently, journalists write, the U.S. Armed Forces in the Middle East are preparing for a possible conflict with Iran or a renewed outbreak of hostilities with the Yemeni Houthis.
The United States Secretary of Defense also warned that Ukraine's European allies will be providing the majority of military aid to Kyiv in the future, since the western part of the Pacific Ocean will become the Pentagon's priority theater of military operations.
At the same time, Radio Liberty, citing the words of the U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, reports that the United States has not yet decided whether it will supply weapons to Ukraine in the future, because Trump is interested in ending Russia's war against Ukraine. The United States, says Whitaker, is counting on Europe to take the lead in providing Ukraine with, quote, the resources and political capital necessary to achieve a lasting peace. And what do you think, how realistic is such a scenario? And will the EU be able to make up for the aid from the United States to Ukraine if the US does indeed step aside? Russia is preparing revenge for the destruction of its strategic aviation. During a phone conversation with Trump, Putin stated that Russia must respond to the SBU special operation Web. Experts also agree that the Kremlin will seek revenge, possibly even with the use of nuclear weapons. Later, Putin made a number of other alarming statements. So how did the Ukrainian president respond, and what kind of strike could Russia actually deliver against Ukraine? Veronika Veremeyeva will tell you more next.
Russia has lost 34% of its strategic aviation, one of the most successful SBU operations, Spiderweb.
This is how the Belaya airfield looks right now, pretty impressive. Strategic enemy aviation
Has brought joy and excitement to Ukraine. And panic in Russia. No one had any doubt that after such a below-the-belt blow, Russia would start making threats. So, as they say, it didn't even take a few days. Putin called Trump to warn him that Russia would retaliate for the destruction of its strategic aviation. Trump wrote a post about this.
We discussed Ukraine's attack on Russian aircraft at airfields, as well as other attacks happening on both sides. It was a good conversation, but not one that will lead to immediate peace. President Putin stated very firmly that he would be forced to respond to the recent attack on the airfields.
However, Trump later deleted this post for some reason and then brought it back again. In short, something strange is going on. At the same time, the US embassy in Kyiv urged US citizens in Ukraine to be cautious and under no circumstances ignore air raid alerts. Zelensky also responded to these threats. There is nothing more to add here.
Many people have spoken with Russia, and at various levels, none of these talks have led not only to a lasting peace, but not even to a halt in the war. Unfortunately, Putin feels impunity, and even after all the horrific Russian strikes, he is apparently preparing some new responses. This means that with every new strike, with every new delay in diplomacy, Russia is giving the middle finger to the entire world. To everyone who does not want to increase pressure on Russia,
in the publication Sky News analyzing what was said above, they concluded that Putin has chosen the tactic of pretending to be a victim in order to somehow soften the way he plans to take revenge.
The Kremlin has completely switched to victim mode. The goal is to turn the situation around regarding Ukraine, to present themselves as the injured party, and to make Donald Trump believe that Russia has the right to respond to the drone attack on its long-range bombers.
It should be added that threats are a familiar theme for the Kremlin, but this time the threat is being assessed as very realistic and, what's worse, catastrophic. So, what could this revenge look like? Let's try to figure out what different experts are saying about this. The Daily Mail publishes a comment from British Colonel Richard Kemp, who believes that Russia's response could be both traditionally military and include the risk of nuclear terror.
Even more horrific are the consequences of a nuclear attack on a nuclear power plant. Although the radiation from the tactical weapon itself would not pose a threat to Western Europe, radioactive fallout from a destroyed reactor would cause immeasurable harm to the environment. The consequences could surpass the Chernobyl disaster. The latter possibility is almost unthinkable. A nuclear bomb dropped on a Ukrainian city such as Odesa or Kyiv.
Another option mentioned by political analyst Alexander Kochetkov is the Oreshnik missile.
A strike with the Oreshnik is possible, but who knows when, where, or what would come of it? Yes, the pseudo-empire has several Oreshnik prototypes, but none are ready for immediate launch. Because if they had one, they would have already tried to strike us with it.
And then there's option number 3, as they say, the Russian classic. Missiles or drones, or both at the same time.
Of the cruise missiles, they can mostly use Kalibers, Iskander Ks, and Kh-22s. But most cruise missiles are shot down quite reliably by our air defense and missile defense systems. They will attack with ballistic missiles, but the enemy is hardly capable of more than a few strikes of 50 to 70 missiles at a time. And we've already been through that. Right now, up to 500 Shaheds are being launched at us per day. This could go on for a week or even longer. Here, the only question is whether our air defense has a sufficient supply of the appropriate munitions.
However, Russia terrorizes Ukraine with missiles and drones every day. So how can we tell what is an act of revenge and what is just the daily terror?
It's also important for every Ukrainian, I think, to understand that nothing will change for us when it comes to Russia continuing its attacks. The very next day, they attacked Sumy with MLRS. But cities including Kharkiv have been shelled with MLRS since the very first days of the full-scale invasion. Nothing has changed. This is just Russian rhetoric, which still hides nothing but the desire to kill civilians.
These Russian threats were commented on by the Center for Countering Disinformation, which essentially summed things up. In this intimidation,
nuclear scare tactics are part of the fear propaganda they have always used to frighten Western societies in order to achieve their goals without war. It should always be remembered that even the theoretical desire to carry out a nuclear strike would harm Russia much more. Because today the entire world is against the use of nuclear weapons, and Russia survives solely on energy resources that are still being bought from it.
So the language of intimidation, the language of terror, the language of killing this is typical Russian rhetoric, and we have long since grown used to it here. No one knows for sure what to expect this time, but we are ready for anything. We haven't been afraid for a long time.
Russia attention is trying to downplay the scale of its lost strategic aviation after the SBU's web operation. Instead of the destroyed equipment, the Russians are bringing other undamaged aircraft to the airfields so that damaged planes are not visible in satellite images. For example, on June 20, OSINT analysts spotted a burned-out Tu-95 aircraft in satellite images at one of the attacked airfields. But in the images from June 4th, a fully intact plane is already standing in its place. And Deputy Lavrov Sergei Ryabkov even stated that during Ukraine's attack, Russian aircraft were not destroyed but merely damaged, and that Russia would restore them. Recently, the Security Service of Ukraine released an extensive video showing that these so-called damages are, as they say, incompatible with life. At the same time, monitors report that Russia is trying to save its strategic bombers by relocating them closer to the United States. Currently, the Russians have dispersed their Tu-160 aircraft across the entire territory of Russia. One Tu-160 was even spotted at Anadyr airfield, which is, attention, 6,770 kilometers from Ukraine and just 660 kilometers from the United States. Listen, should we tell them that this won't help? Please like this video to support what we do, and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our next episodes. See you!